All right, folks, let's begin. So we're rounding out our afternoon talks. Two more speakers left. We've got Colleen Dieter, and then we've got Dick Peterson. So Colleen Dieter is with Red Wheelbarrow Plant Care, and she's done, she majored in philosophy, minored in horticulture, and is a transplant from Ohio, and has worked with the Sustainable Food Center for a little while. And we're excited to have her here. She normally speaks to a homeowner audience, but is an excellent resource for talking about landscaping with tough Texas herbs. And so we're excited to have her today to speak to this more professional audience. Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you, Meredith. Thanks for having me, you guys. And I just want to say thanks to Denise and Meredith and all the folks from the city who were really scrambling this morning to get everybody scheduled. And I really appreciate your effort. And could you, next slide, please? Here's me. Do I do it myself? Thank you. I use this one. Okay. All right. That's it. So usually I bring this list of plants as a handout when I do talks, but you guys are going to have access to all the presentations after the talk on the city website. And so this is there for your reference. It's a more general list of plants that have survived in the landscapes that I've worked in through drought and cold, extreme cold, not just the extreme heat and droughts, but also some of the extreme winters that we've had in the last few years. So y'all can reference that after the talk. It's just even more broad landscape plants. And it has my contact info on it too. And I want to tell you guys a little bit about myself. Right now I primarily work with homeowners, giving them advice about what to do with their yards. And my background with Red Wheelbarrow, which was my business that I started in 2003, was that I primarily did personal gardening services. So I had a set group of customers with very complicated, unconventional yards, and just came and took care of them and did whatever they needed to do. And so that informs my consulting now. That knowledge of how the landscapes mature and age and how much care they actually really need in the long run and how much water they really need in the long run is all part of my background. And so for you guys as professionals, I do work with some other landscape architects, kind of helping them with their planting plans and things like that. So if you ever need consulting about which plants you're choosing, trying to find the right plants for the right spot, if you're more into hardscaping and you're not into plants at all, I'm available to help consult with that. If you're just wanting a second pair of eyes on your planting plans, I'm available for consulting. Okay, today we're going to talk about herbs, which is one of my personal passions. And first I'm going to start out with a cliched definition. But basically, I'm considering herbs as any non-agricultural plant that is edible, medicinal, fragrant, or otherwise useful that has value that's not just ornamental. So I want to expand your conventional ideas about what herbs are and how they're used in landscapes, okay? So we're going to talk about how to use herbs in the landscape and not just have them be separate in herb gardens. And then also, the title of the talk was Sustainable Herbs, Sustainable Landscaping with Herbs. And so I wanted to tell you that to me, sustainable means drought tolerant, cold tolerant, heat tolerant, low maintenance, wind and rain tolerant, which is also something that we get a lot of in Austin, and needing few resources in terms of time, feeding, care, that sort of thing. Okay, so basically all of the plants that I'm going to show to you are going to have those characteristics, okay? And then I also am going to touch a little bit on the style of planting and the way that we place the plants in the landscape that can help make the entire landscape more sustainable. And finally, one of the things I want you guys to carry away from this talk is to think about why we ought to use herbs in the landscape. And one of the reasons is that with your customers, it's going to help you engage them in the landscape in another way. So it's more than just coming into someone's yard or onto someone's property and putting in the plants. If you can give them little factoids about, well, you can use this plant in the kitchen or you can use this for that, it gives them another way to engage with the landscape, and it adds value for them. And then they may want to interact with the yard a little bit more, or with their property a little bit more, because they have a little bit of knowledge about something useful coming from the yard. And also, we can increase sustainability in our landscapes by asking for something back from our landscapes, right? So we could make the most out of every square foot in our landscapes by requiring that the plants in the landscapes have some other use besides ornamental, right? So that's why what I like about herbs. And I wrote an article about herbs for the Statesman years ago, and I talked about them as being kind of the old grandparents of the plant world, where they have all this lore and knowledge that come along with them that just really make it fun to know them and fun to interact with them. So I was talking a little bit earlier about putting plants, how we place the plants in the yard can contribute to sustainability. And what I found in my personal gardening business is I would come into a landscape, and the landscapes that looked like this one, this is Lucinda Hudson's home. She's a local herb expert. The landscapes that looked like this were actually the lowest maintenance and the lowest water use, believe it or not. The landscapes that had a lot of gravel mulch, decomposed granite and stuff like that, it was a lot more work to keep the gravel clean and to keep the weeds out of it. And it's the kind of work that people tend to not like to do. At least I don't like weeding as much as I like pruning. So this is one way of thinking about it. And this is a cottage aesthetic. Obviously, we don't always want a cottage feel to our gardens. So here's one that I did with a customer in South Austin. And this one, you can see we went for a more xeric desert feel. It doesn't have any herbs in it, but I just wanted to show it to you guys. Even though it has a desert xeric feel, we still put a lot of plants in there. We still try to pack a lot of plants in, because wherever there's plants growing, there's no weeds growing, right? And so that gravel, too, we put in the foreground there. That's sort of like right up by the street. It's sort of like a replacement for a sidewalk. We put the gravel really, really deep there, and that helped prevent weeds and stuff like that. So this has a xeric feel to it, but we still use that silver ponyfoot as a ground cover there to help prevent weeds and help hold in water too. And the plants will shade the ground around them, stuff like that. So that's what I want to encourage all of you guys to try. I maintained this landscape myself too after it was installed, and it was one of the lower maintenance landscapes that I did. So, okay, so now on to herbs. So another thing I want you to take away from this is a picture of an herb garden that I did. And what I want you to take away from this is expanding your definition of what an herb is. And you can see all the different shapes and textures of the plants in that herb garden. The one, the grassy looking one, that's lemongrass on the right. On the foreground there, that's a little plant called feverfew. That's a medicinal herb. It's great for migraines. So really, you can see the different colors of the flowers and the different textures and shapes and sizes of the plants. So really, herbs are just a huge category of plants beyond what we usually think of, like rosemary and stuff like that, for when you're designing or thinking about the plants. Does that make sense? Do y'all have any questions right now? Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the plants. my background is really as a horticulturist, so I wanted to show off some pictures. So the white flowers there, that's white yarrow. And that's an interesting plant. It's controversial. Some people think that it's native, and some people believe that it's not native, that it's from Europe. But it certainly grows as though it's native. It really took over that whole space right there. And it's used, it has a medicinal use. It's used as an antiseptic. So if you have a little cut on your hand or something, you're working out in the garden and you get a scrape, you can rub the leaves on it, and it'll help clean out the wound. And it just makes a really nice ground cover. Right there, it's in part shade. I've had the best luck with it in part shade and places where it can get afternoon shade and be a little bit protected from the heat of the day. That's in heavy, heavy clay soil that doesn't drain well there too, by the way, and it's thriving. And I've never really watered it. So then in front of it, or behind it rather, is the prickly pear cactus, which is edible. So I'm going to count that as an herb and expanding our definition of herbs, right? And that plant needs almost no care and no water. It's done well everywhere I've planted it. That's the spineless variety. And the little tiny green pads on the top, like the brand new pads that were growing out in that photo, are really good to eat. You guys have probably had it at the Mexican restaurants. Nopales, nopalitos, right? They're good. It's one of my favorites with refried beans. And then, yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. So that she asked about, there's a few different bugs that get on the prickly pear cacti, and she mentioned the one that looks like, is it cottony looking? Does it look cottony? So there's 3 different bugs that they get, and there's the cottony one that's called a cochineal, and if you smash it, it turns red. It's bright red. Also useful. It's an insect. It's not that one. Yeah, so that's a scale. So then there's the cochineals that are like woolly looking, and then they get scale pretty often. And I found that they get scale if they're getting a little too much water now and then. So if you can back off and, not water them, or if they're in a spot that doesn't drain well, although this spot doesn't drain well and I haven't gotten them. Yeah, what's that? Injure the paddle? Oh, really? Okay, that's interesting. Did y'all hear that? He said that if you injure the paddles at all, the pads at all on the cactus, that sometimes that's when they'll get scale. So that's an interesting observation. If you're really concerned, the best thing to do is to scrape them off. If it's a really big plant, you could try spraying them with horticultural oil during cool weather. And that will kill them, but then the dead insects will still be stuck to the plant, so you'd still have to try to scrape them off. The other one that they get all the time is cactus bug, the cactus bug. It's just called the cactus bug. They're like, they have long legs, and they're red and black. They look kind of like, I don't know, like a stink bug, sort of, and they hang out in big groups and move around in funny ways, They're not ever going to kill the plants. It's just purely an aesthetic thing. All 3 of those plants, all 3 of those bugs, they're never going to kill the plant. So they're like red and blue or red and black little buggers. No, no. I don't know how they eat. She asked if they're the ones with the pointy noses, so they drill in. Oh, that's only on agaves. Yeah, the agave weevils. Yeah, they're smaller. The agave weevils are big. These guys, the cactus bugs, they're real small. Yeah. I think so. Yeah, I think so. But again, none of them are going to kill the plant. It's really just an aesthetic thing. And to me, the prickly pear cactus and their rugged look, I feel like the bugs just are part of that, you know, but if you just really can't stand it, the best thing to do is to try to scrape them off. So, yeah. Okay. Then on the right there in the foreground is oregano as the ground cover. And I was really surprised that I tried it as an experiment in this space because I didn't think it would get enough light. It's kind of a part shade situation, but it did great. Really took off there. It's on drip irrigation in that picture. It gets water once a week now. But yeah, it did really well. Oh, one thing I wanted to tell you guys, if you decide to use oregano as a ground cover in your landscapes, be sure that you get a variety that actually forms a ground cover, because there's some varieties that grow up to be little bushes, kind of like small little shrubs. This one is called Hot and Spicy, and it spreads out more across the ground. So look for a Hot and Spicy if you're trying to get a good ground cover. That's the one that I like. And of course, that's a culinary herb that you can cook with. It's better if it's dried first before you cook with it. Used fresh, it doesn't have as much flavor. It's one of the few herbs that that's true of. So there it is. Looking good. What's that? Oh, yeah, that's a great point. Most of the herbs, yeah, he said that's deer resistant. So most of the herbs are going to be deer resistant because of their scent. You know, it's the kind of thing that the deer aren't going to want to eat as much because of the smell. The same reason why we like them is what drives the deer away. And so the yarrow is deer resistant as well. Thank you for mentioning that. Let's see. So I also wanted to show herbs in pots. So here's a picture that I took of a Spanish lavender in a small pot. And it's a really good pot plant. And Spanish lavender is the one that I most recommend for the landscapes. And lavender is used primarily for fragrance, used in a lot of cosmetics, and often used as a cut flower or dried flower too. But a lot of times it's used in cooking as well, particularly in French cooking. So if you have any customers that are really gourmet folks, they might like to have some lavender. And this one, the Spanish lavender, is a little bit different species from our typical lavender, and I can't remember the botanical names right now, but it's much more drought tolerant, much more heat tolerant than the other varieties of lavender. The other thing about lavenders is that some of the ones that are sold around town are also not cold hardy, and they'll die in the winter. And the Spanish lavender pretty much has been bulletproof for me. I've never killed one, and I've killed lots of others. So it's a pretty good one. And it did really well in that pot for a long time, too. It has a little bit different scent than some of the other lavenders, you know, and I actually prefer the flower on the Spanish lavender, too. It's more showy than some of the others. Yeah, yes? She asked if I know if that will do well in the Houston area, and I would say maybe not because of the extra rain there. I would be concerned about root rot. On some of the herbs like that and the oregano, they're from the Mediterranean region. That's where they're native to, and they're accustomed to having very rocky, kind of well-drained soil and long periods of dry weather. So I don't know. I'd be curious. If I grew it in Houston, I'd probably do it in a raised bed. So, yes. Oh, good. Thank you. All right. Thanks, Alec. That's great. Cool. Good. Verification. Okay. Upper right-hand corner there, that's echinacea, or our purple coneflower, you know. We can't forget that one has been traditionally used as a medicinal herb. The leaves and roots are either made into a tincture, like in a liquid extract that's used to boost your immune system, or can be ground up, dried and ground and taken as a pill too. And that one's really native easy to grow. I've even had good luck with it in some shade too. Also deer resistant. Great plant. And now the nurseries are coming out with new varieties. Like it's kind of went out of style for a while. Now it's kind of coming back into style. So they're coming out with new colors to look for, stuff like that. No, but they may not be medicinal, right? Yeah, I've also heard that some of them have varying success rates too. But it's kind of cool to check them out. So there's that one. Any questions about that one? Yeah? Okay. And then down below is a rose. I'm going to talk a little bit more about roses. I wanted to know if anybody could identify that rose. Everybody thinks it's Belinda's dream. Okay. I bought it for $3, and it didn't have a label. So the consensus has been Belinda's dream so far, and I thought this is a good opportunity to ask this group. So that's Belinda's dream. Okay, good. Next to it is its traditional companion plant, garlic chives. So it's a long-standing little organic gardening trick to plant anything in the onion, chive, garlic family near roses to help repel insects and prevent fungal infections on the roses. And it's not the best picture, but garlic chives are a really great landscape plant. I found a clump on the ground one time in a parking lot, and I planted it, and it is still with me. And that was in Ohio. I moved it from 15 years ago from Ohio, and it's still with me, all dried out. So it's a great plant. That's all I can say, and really underused, and it gets a really nice white flower on it too. And it's a culinary herb, so you could use it just like any other, like a scallion, like green onions, something like that. So there's also onion chives, which is the one you also see that has it's a little bit smaller plant and has purple flowers instead. They're both really good plants for our landscapes. And you can see how it's not in an herb garden per se, right? I'm using the herbs in with other plants, in with perennials in different ways, right? I just, in my mind, treat them just like any other perennial that I would plant in the landscape like that. So, we doing okay? Okay. Any questions about those guys? Chives, they can do lots of different types of light too, light levels. Also very deer resistant. Okay, here's a shot of two different angles of the same landscape. And the plant in the foreground, the big fluffy green one, that's a scented geranium. I had no idea that it would grow like that. I didn't have much experience. This is the citronella scented one. It's in bright, indirect light, and it's evergreen. And you can see it's right there by the that rain chain where it's going to get a lot of rain, and it gets, that area drains pretty well there. They have pretty good soil, but it gets drip irrigation once a week. So that's a fun one. The scented geraniums, as far as I know, they're really only grown for their scent. And so when you rub the leaves, you can enjoy it, or sometimes if you're sitting really close to it, you can smell it. And they come in lots of different scents. And this is near a seeding area. So again, it's another way to engage with the landscape. So when you have a seating area that you're designing or installing, you're thinking about a space where people are going to be spending time. Isn't it fun to have something that they can touch and interact with while they're hanging out in that space? And have another way to engage the landscape and make them want to be out there in that space and make them want to value you even more for your great knowledge. Does that make sense? So so that's a fun one. I think some people make tea. Does anybody else know anything about scented geraniums? I don't know that much about them. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the citronella scented one is called mosquito plant. But they have other scents, like they have rose and cinnamon and chocolate and lemon and stuff like that. So that's a good, thank you for reminding me. It may not be entirely cold hardy. It's in a pretty protected spot in this space. So, and it's in central Austin too. But it's gone through some very cold winters. And it's been there for years. But yeah, if you were on the outside of town or it was, I wouldn't plant it on a northern exposure. Thank you for reminding me of that. And speaking of that, in the pot, all the way on the right, you can see a topiary. There's a standard topiary. That's a Bay Laurel, which is another Mediterranean herb. And that's the bay leaf. So when you are cooking and you're following a recipe, sometimes it calls for bay leaf. Well, they're really easy to grow here in Austin. That's a really, really good one for customers because all they have to do is run out and grab one off the plant and throw it in their soup or on their roast or whatever. It's really good. Yeah. I don't know. I've been trying to figure that out. She asked if there's a native bay laurel. There is. So spice bush, yeah, I've been wondering if they're related. Okay, cool. So I know, I think Mitch at Hill Country, at Hill Country Native Plants. What is it? Hill Country Native Plants, right? Hill Country Natives. I know he's growing them. I know he has them, the native ones. So thank you for mentioning that because I would like to transition and start growing the native ones. That are going to be more cold hardy because the Mediterranean one that you typically find at the nursery, I've lost them. If I planted them in the fall, sometimes I'll lose them that winter. Yes. As far as I know, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for your help. That's great. Yeah. So they do really well in sun or shade. And they are really great in pots like this, especially as a topiary. I've seen them as, and planted them as like pyramid-shaped topiaries. But left alone in the landscape, they'll grow into a great big round shrub that'll get like 8 or 10 feet tall and maybe 6 feet wide. So it can be very good for privacy screening. And they're just really pretty, tidy plants. But yeah, I wouldn't plant one with a northern exposure in the fall because it won't be established enough to withstand the winter. But otherwise, they've been really great plants. So yeah, thanks for your help with the native. I've been trying to research that to find out about the native bays. Okay, I didn't want to do this talk without one vine at least. We got 10 minutes. Okay. And so the main herbal vine that we like to grow in Austin is the passion vine. And there it is in all its purple glory. The Passiflora incarnata is the native one. Well, there's a bunch of native ones, but it's the one that's in cultivation the most out of all the natives. And it's used as an antidepressant. Actually, so people make a tincture or an extract from the leaves and flowers and use that as an antidepressant. So that's probably the only one that I know of that's a vine that has an herbal use too. So you got to beware. Make sure when you're buying the passion vines that you're getting the variety that you want and that you know a little bit about the varieties because some of them can be invasive. And some are not cold hardy too. Yeah. Any questions about that one? Input? Oh yeah, thank you for chiming in about that. It's a great butterfly plant. So if you're ever doing a butterfly garden or trying to attract more butterflies, it's a great one because it's a larval host for the Gulf fritillaries. Little orange caterpillars will appear on it, and that's the only thing that they eat. So it's really good. Then down below that is a picture from last fall of a landscape I did where we planted a big group of Mexican mint marigolds, which are the yellow plants in the foreground. The yellow plants that with the taller flowers behind it is skeleton leaf goldeneye. And so those guys are used as a tarragon replacement a lot of times culinarily. It's a little bit easier to grow than tarragon in Austin, and it's a little bit nicer plant too. And it's also a good butterfly and pollinator attractor. And it blooms a little bit in the springtime, like in May, depending on the weather. It'll bloom a little bit in the spring, but then it puts on a big fall show in October. So it gets about this tall. It's a great plant. I like that one. Does anybody have any questions about that one or something to add, you know? And again, there it is in the landscape, not relegated to the herb garden. In this picture, it's on drip irrigation once a week. Always looks good. That's a great point. That's true. I know, because there are plants that are similar to it that'll break open by the time fall comes. They get taller and taller and taller, and then they'll get the flowers on them, and then they'll break open from the weight. But this one, they stay together really well and stay clumpy like that, real dense. So it's good. Yeah, similar plants of that shape and size often break open, but they don't. So that's a good point. Thank you. Yes, there's heavy deer, and this particular yard has really high deer pressure, and yeah, they're all deer resistant. So, has anybody grown the passion flower in a deer area? Did you find it to be deer resistant? Yeah, that one I'm not sure about. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. I would encourage you guys, if you do buy passion flowers, if you do buy passion flowers, try to get a 5-gallon plant. Don't buy a 1 gallon. Move the caterpillars over. That's very kind. What a kind-hearted person you are. That's very sweet. That's a good idea. Okay. All right. Then we're getting into the roses. Roses long-term. We've got 5 minutes. Okay. We'll probably wrap it up here with the roses. Long-term, a long time, roses have been used obviously for perfume. They're really good for your skin, using the dried rose petals as a ground up and packed on your skin helps make your skin really soft. You know, our rose petals are real silky. It'll make your skin silky too. And the one on the upper right-hand corner is the Mutabilis rose. That's arguably the most easy one to grow. And in that picture, it's kind of rangy in that picture, in part shade. It's in a woodland garden there, so it kind of has a more open, natural shape. But I've seen that plant hedged and much more dense, and it gets really, really big. I had another customer that had it in full sun, and it was like 8 by 8. Really good plant. Almost always blooming. The one on the bottom is Martha Gonzalez. It's another one that's really easy to plant, and I wanted to highlight, or easy to grow, and I wanted to highlight Martha Gonzalez because of its shape and size. It's a really good shape and size. It only gets like 4 by 4, which is really great for our Texas landscapes. I'm always finding that with the architectures of our homes in Austin that we have low windows or low porches, and it's a great one because it just stays small. You know, I'm always looking for shrubs that stay small and have something else to offer, like blooms and an herbal use too. So Martha Gonzalez is a great one. Blooms a lot. I've had some problems with powdery mildew on them, but as long as I prune them once a year, they tend to not get the powdery mildew problems as much. So the one on the left, the yellow one, is Grandma's Yellow. It used to be called Nacogdoches, but it's been improved, and now it's called Grandma's Yellow. That's my favorite. So they're a lot of fun. You guys have any questions about them? Yeah, try to get the antique, these are all antique or found roses for the most part, and they're the ones that are going to be durable, low maintenance, sustainable, all right? What's that? No, not deer resistant, thank you. I know. I appreciate that. They'll eat the flowers. Okay. Yes, I have tried that, and it did not work. Yeah. It was a real bummer. So last thing I wanted, there's a few more slides, but cutting it short. The last thing I wanted to highlight a couple of mid-sized trees because with some of the landscape architects I've been working with, we're really struggling to find good trees for urban landscapes. Now that Austin's growing and becoming more urban, there's less and less open space for large trees, but we still need to have trees in the landscape for shade. And both of these have uses. So the huisatch with the yellow flowers. Actually, I was just at the King Ranch a few months ago taking their tour, which was really fun. It was way more interesting than I expected. And they sell their huisatch flowers to L'Oreal in France for them to use for their cosmetics, for the perfume. So I found that fascinating. They've just done everything they can on that land to get every dollar out of it that they possibly can, and including what most ranchers consider to be a nuisance tree, they've turned into money. So there it is, huisatch. Sometimes it blooms in the early spring here in Austin. We're at its northernmost range, and so sometimes it doesn't bloom if we have a very cold winter. But again, it's a mid-sized tree, and I've really been struggling in my designs to find good mid-sized trees to use for shade and cover. And then next to it is Nakawa, another more South Texas native, and that one has fruit that's edible, and it's a really, really good tree for wildlife. And someone I know went on a tour at the Wildflower Center recently, and they were talking about Nakawa, and the docent at the Wildflower Center said, "That's the tree of the future." So I thought, that's true. It's just the right size. It gets like 20 feet tall and wide. Look at the shape of it. Makes it a great street tree because there's no large limbs coming out laterally. And it blooms in the spring, gets the fruit. It's great for wildlife. Very durable tree. Yes? It's also edible by people. That's why I included it in the herb talk. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. Sorry. Yes. Flame leaf sumac. I love flame leaf sumac. Yeah, I think it's a great tree. Yeah, in the fall. Yeah, they're great. I mean, you see them all over town in the fall. Yes. Yeah, they're a really good, durable alternative Japanese maples. Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. I know. Yeah. So I was always concerned about their cold hardiness too, but I know of several large ones around town. Like there's one on that Chuck saw. We saw it on Pleasant Valley. There's an arboretum on Pleasant Valley near MLK, and there's a very large Inakawa. They're doing well. Jill Noakes has one in her yard. It's really big. And I've seen them in landscapes coming up in fence lines from the birds. So I'm feeling like I would avoid planting them in the fall and winter. You know what I mean? I think I would plant them like now, more at the end of the winter, because they may go through transplant shock, and then the cold on top of that would be a problem. So, in a perfect world, I would try to plant them more closer to the spring, just in case, But yeah. Any other questions for me? Thanks, y'all. I really appreciate you having me. That's good. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Colleen. We really appreciate that presentation you did. That was wonderful. And please do feel free to contact Colleen if you have any questions about this. Her contact information is on today's agenda as well. All right, so before we go on to our next speaker, we do have some evaluations we're going to pass out. Please feel free to do those either right after the presentation. We'd ask that you do pay attention to the presentation we're about to see. And then if you'd like to fill those out just right after the presentation, we'll collect those at the end.